impart a little bit of my wisdom off onto you in terms of PR and how to do it, and most importantly, how not to do it. I'll get the shameless plug out of the way. I've been doing this a very long time, but it's something I love doing. PR industry is an interesting dysfunctional one because there's this strange little love triangle between clients, PR agencies, and journalists. I've been all three. I started out as a journalist. And after that, I worked in-house for a fairly big agency, both here in the US and in Asia. And I was also a client. In-house, I worked for Splunk, and I worked for Visa. So I started Upright about 3 years ago because I recognized the strange codependency dysfunction of this strange little love triangle, and I wanted to break through it. So today, my firm works mostly with tech companies. Some of you might have heard of. Kobe is one of the players here. iVerify, Pandora Radio, Ant, Tacit, Tableau Software. And I'm quite proud of the fact many of the clients that we've had have gone on to greater things, whether it's an IPO or we've had clients that have been acquired by Splunk, Groupon, and PayPal. So what we try to do is we try to make the companies that we work with look good, and that's kind of really what I'm going to talk about today. So let's talk PR. I'd like to start off with sort of two stories. One is about a company that tried to go it alone, and then one is about a client of mine. So the first one was a company that reached out to me and said, you know what, we've been trying to do PR by ourselves and it's just not working. So I just asked them, so what are you doing? He basically said, we write 2 press releases a month, and we're just not getting any coverage. So I said, well, what are you doing with those press releases? Well, we put them on PR Web, which is a press release distribution service. And I said, well, are you following up with journalists at all? I said, no. Okay, well, that's part of the problem. Press releases are a great vehicle for sort of getting your messaging and your wording down and your thought process about what you're trying to tell. But I'm going to go into more of that later. But press releases is sort of one tool in our bag of tricks. So you don't have to go it alone to realize that PR doesn't always work out quite right. I had a client who was a country manager for a shipping company, and we'd set up an interview with him for a major trade publication. So my job was to make sure he was well briefed, make sure that he knew who the journalist was, what the angles were, what the questions he would ask. So I came up with this 5-page document that had everything: his name, photo. These are the questions he's likely to ask. These are the answers you should probably give. So interview day, I was sitting in there with him, and so it's me, the reporter. First question the reporter asks is, so what about the container shipping rates for the Trans-Pacific these days? They seem to be running high right now. What do you attribute this to? So the manager looks at the sheet that I prepared for him, looks at me, looks at the sheet again, and goes, that's the third question. So these are the kind of things we deal with as PR people. But so even if you've got the best PR support, there are going to be special moments where things are not going to work the way you want them to. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is how to get coverage if you're doing it yourself. And if you're not doing it yourself, how to maximize the opportunities that you do have if you are fortunate enough to have a great PR agency, or if you don't have a great PR agency. One of the things that I talk about that strangely dysfunction between journalist, PR person, and client is that we all think less of the other part of the triangle from time to time. So I'm going to hopefully raise the tone and the quality of the dialogue between the three, at least today. So what is PR? Let's just start with a basic question. What is public relations? Everyone's got their own little definition. So let's look at it sort of just holistically. This is the definition that I'm going to really talk about today. It's utilizing the media to carry positive stories about your company or your products. It's a form of messaging around reaching out to a broad audience that has staying power and also builds third-party credibility in ways that advertising sometimes can't, or testimonials are a great way. That's also a great way to build third-party credibility. it's telling your story to the right audience in a way that resonates with them. And it's a mixture of the right content at the right time to the right audience. And we were just talking earlier about CES coming up. Now is the time we have to start talking about CES, because journalists start planning for this January event in October. So we're doing a lot of talk around what are we going to say to reporters at CES. What are they going to be interested in? Are they going to be interested in curved TV screens this year? Are they going to be interested in wearables? So we need to sort of match their expectations with where our expectations are, or where your expectations are, and how to interject into that news cycle. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. More importantly, it's good to ask, what isn't PR? A lot of people have a misunderstanding of what PR is and what PR isn't. So these are just a few things that PR is not. It's not your own personal publicity pipeline. You can't put out a piece of news and expect it to be covered exactly the way you want to. It's not like an ad. It's not like an advertorial. It's not 100% on message content unless you're really good at what you do. The second point is the one that's that resonates with me the most. PR is not a press release. Press release is a tactic, not a strategy. Putting out a press release will not result in coverage. It's just one of the, like I said earlier, it's one of the tools that we use. Just because you think something is news doesn't mean reporters are going to think that as well. PR is also not a quick fix. It's not a hose you can turn on. It's not a switch you can turn on and say, okay, we're going to start our PR campaign today and start to expect getting coverage. Start getting media coverage. It takes time. It literally is. I talk about it's not a personal publicity pipeline, but it is a pipeline. You have to prime the pump. You need to engage with reporters months before you expect to see coverage. A good example is, I've worked with clients who say, we want to be in Recode, or we want our product announcement to be in the New York Times. I worked with Visa for nearly 10 years. We were able to get a Fortune piece. It took 6 months from the first conversation with the journalist to the storyteller. So this stuff takes time, even with a big company. With that in mind, strategic approach is always something that really drives PR. Having strategy behind what you're trying to announce and what you're going to say is the difference between good PR and great PR. I talk a lot about storytelling. Storytelling is a very important part of what we do. It's one thing to announce a new product, or to introduce something, or to make an announcement, but journalists are always looking for a good story. And if you can connect with the journalist in that level, that's going to result in some really strong coverage. PR is also making sure that between the announcements and the events you're involved in and whatever you're doing, there is a steady stream, sort of steady drumbeat of momentum. We're talking about, the announcements are always the easy things related to public relations. So you want to build on those, providing content that shows that you or your company is an expert in what you're doing, that you're available to a reporter to talk about things that aren't necessarily related to you, to provide expert opinion on things. I mean, all of you in the room are experts in what you do, whether it's devices or fitness or Internet of Things. So these are subjects that reporters are chomping at the bit to talk about right now. So the secret is figuring out how to connect your brain to their brain, so that when they have a story idea, they'll proactively call you instead of you sort of chasing them. That's a dragon you don't always catch. So you always have to be sensitive to that. Else. One of the great things is figuring out what success is. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but measuring success by the kind of coverage you get. It's one thing to have your company get a one-sentence mention in mention with a list of competitors. It's another thing to have a whole feature article talking about your company or your product or what you're doing. And that latter stuff is the kind of coverage you're really working towards. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to do some of that. One of the things I talk a lot about is knowing what to talk about and when. Very often, companies make the mistake of only focusing on product PR. And that is just one component of public relations and getting your message out. So at any given time, we're looking at like 8 of these things. This is like sort of getting the fuel mix right. At any given time, we might be emphasizing product PR. We might be spending time on getting the story straight for the right audience with messaging. We might be doing a bit around leadership PR and how to position your CEO or your product expert as an expert in his or her field. With regards to Media 101, unless you're Apple or Google or Volkswagen, you're not a household name for most reporters. So it's always good to step back and give them the basics. I'll give an example of when I was working with Visa. Everyone thinks they know what Visa is as a company. Everyone's probably got a Visa card sitting in their wallet or their purse. But I spent more time talking to reporters about saying what we were and what we weren't. Visa is a company that doesn't issue credit cards. It doesn't issue debit cards. That's what the banks do. So to call us a credit card company when I was there at the time was misleading. So you spend a lot of time explaining to reporters who you are, even though you think they know who you are. An economic potential storyline, it's always good to go above what you're doing. What's the impact of what your company's working on, what the industry space is working on? Is there a dollar figure you can attach to it? Is there a trend you can attach to it? That's always worth looking into and worth talking to reporters about, because they don't want to be your publicity machine. They are looking for interesting stories that their readers are going to be fascinated by and engaged with. So always trying to want to figure out what's relevant to them in the context of what you're doing. Interjection PR, how can you get involved or comment on a trend that's going on right now? And I'll give you an example. One of our clients is a biometrics company called iVerify. And they deal in IVing biometrics, but their product wasn't quite ready for sort of general consumer news media. But what I wanted to do, it was very cool technology. So what we did was we connected the CEO with a bunch of different reporters just to introduce, just informal introduction. We knew these meetings weren't going to result in coverage, but I wanted to say, look, this is a cool company doing some really interesting stuff. Sit down with them over coffee. So we scheduled a few of these meetings. And one of them was with John Blackstone at CBS. And again, months away from any sort of product announcement. But one day, about a year ago, he calls me up and said, I don't know if you saw, but there's this big celebrity hacking scandal where a lot of celebrities were having their nude photos captured off their phones or off the cloud and put out over the internet or elsewhere. Would your client be interested in talking about security measures that people can take to ensure their phones are more secure or their pictures on the cloud are more secure? Could not buy that kind of coverage. That's the kind of stuff that we were trying to get with those meetings. We knew they weren't going to lead to coverage immediately, but we got to a point where reporters were reaching out to us for comment, and that's really the ultimate goal of what you're trying to do. You want to sort of be ahead of the news cycle. You want to make sure the reporters know you're there and that they need you as much as you need them. Also in the fuel mix, social media is a huge factor. Is your social media reflecting what your PR team is doing? Social media is tricky. There's the sort of consumer aspect, and there's also the business aspect. You want to make sure they sound like they're coming from the same voice. And then measuring results. What is success for you? Is it number of clips? Is it the quality of clips, quality of publications? Is it the angle? Is it the product? So these are things you always have to ask when sort of building your PR efforts. One of the things I like to talk about, because again, I've talked about how people want immediate results, and it's hard to do. So if you're familiar with the slow food movement, you'll know that it's a concept that was created as a direct alternative to fast food. It emphasized quality over speed and made for a better and tastier experience. The concept of slow PR isn't much different. It's spending time on the front end on messaging and content and emphasis on substance over style. It's important to emphasize that the slow and slow PR doesn't mean slow. It's like taking a long time to develop things. But it does take time. It takes time to pull the content together. But it's more about the investment and hard work involved in diving into a PR campaign. And if you don't invest that time at the front end, you're not going to get the desired results. Of course, it's all great in theory, but how can you go all Wilke salt on PR and say, look, I want it now? What do you do? So, first place to start is, what does success look like to you? Do you want to be in Recode or Wall Street Journal? Do you want to be in New York Times? Do you want to be in Runner's World? The answer dictates what the strategy is. If I have a client that says, we want to be in the Wall Street Journal, my initial reaction is to always ask why. Is it because the ego of the CEO, which is actually a fair reason. If that's what's driving PR, then let's do it. But if it's to reach customers or to reach developers, that may not be the best way to go. There are some great tier 2 and tier 3 publications that your audience reads before they read the Wall Street Journal. And it's easier to get coverage in them sometimes. So sometimes it's better to focus on the tier 2 and tier 3 publications than it is the Wall Street Journals and the Bloombergs and the CNETs and the CNBCs of the world. So don't be afraid of lower readership, because the lower readership may be more qualified readership for you. But there are so many writers, there are so many different publications, so it's always good to bear that in mind when you're asking yourself, where do we want to be seen? Who do we want to read us? Again, sort of the mantra of the theme today is telling the story at the right time to the right people. What makes a good story? Is it news? Is it interesting? Is there controversy involved? Are you talking about a particular drama? Is it the old news adage? What's more interesting? Man bites dog or dog bites man? Man bites dog is a story. So do we have that story? Then let's talk about that. Is it timely? Is there a data element? Is there a human element? Is there a number that we can tack things to? What's the competition doing in comparison to what you're doing? That's an interesting story. And always in the back of your head when you're thinking about what you should go out to the media about is, why is the reporter going to ask, why should I care? And do you have an answer for that? So with that in mind, what brings all this to life? Again, data, a good quote, a good customer story. A little word about customer stories. A lot of companies that I've dealt with say, we've got great customer stories, but they're not big enough customers. And I will always err on the side of, I would rather have a more interesting customer story than a big customer. It doesn't matter to a reporter if there's a compelling story or a compelling use case. That's more interesting than whether it's Apple or Google or Volkswagen or General Motors or whomever, because chances are people know those stories. It's the little, it's the David over Goliath thing that always appeals to reporters and readers. So always keep that in mind. Jon Stewart said, if we amplify everything, we hear nothing. Chances are you have a lot to tell, but that doesn't mean you have to. It's important to refine your messaging, tell the story how you want to tell it, and to whom. A common mistake when companies try to do PR on their own, they want to sort of cram everything into a press release or everything into an interview. One of the best things you can do is take sort of 3 or 4 most salient points and build around that. I had a client once that was making a funding announcement, and we did a first code release and had everything in there that we needed, the number, key investors, and sort of what the company did, who they did, who they worked with, and edits came back, and they just sort of put the kitchen sink in. It's like, we've got 25 patents, we've got 30 MIT trained data scientists, we're at this show, we're at this expo, we announced this last year. It's just too much. It gets to a point where there's information overload. And I'll talk a little bit later. We don't have, the journalists and PR people are thinking in the Twitter mentality. You've got, at minimally, you've got 140 characters to sort of grab an attention, or you've got 50 words or whatever to grab a reporter's attention if they don't know who you are. So you really have to be selective with the information you pull together. Before reaching out to reporters, it's important that you have your house in order. If you're going to do PR on your own, find someone in your company that is passionate about the company, who's willing to take this on, who has sort of a flair for the creative, and again, embrace that passion, because they're going to be the person that's thinking externally and tries to bring that voice of reason to what you're doing, and should be someone who's always going to ask, why is this interesting? Why is this important? Why is this relevant? That person working with you needs to spend time on messaging. One of the best ways to get early coverage is develop your own content. Press releases and announcements are going to do one thing, but start working on contributed content. Byline guest pieces in publications that you guys read, your customers read, are always good. Make sure you know the difference of what is free content and what's pay to play. There's a lot of media outlets that are migrating over to, if I'm going to take contributed content, we're going to charge for it. Media recognizes there's more people willing to pay for content than there are people willing to not. So they're taking advantage of that. But always try to go beyond what's news and tell your own story through a variety of methods. So you've heard my diatribes on press releases. This is a story that appeared in CNBC about a month ago. Ari Levy wrote it. It was about the company that works with HBO on sort of cloud streaming. It's AppDynamics, if you've heard of them. With press releases, nobody reads them, and here's why. You're sending the same piece of news to every reporter in the world, and unless it's truly news, why would a reporter want to write something that everyone else is writing? So with this CNBC article, its origin was not a press release, and yet it hits every note about a company that is put in a press release these days. Even that first paragraph, what does it say? It says AppDynamics has big clients, their products do amazing things, and they have a shit hot CEO. That is the content of every press release ever written. But you could not put this in a press release and send it out to all and sundry. You had to pick the right media outlet, and you had to work closely with that journalist. So how do you do that? That is a challenge because, I'll full disclosure, I'm good friends with Ari Levy. He's a great guy, but he gets 950 emails a day with PR companies, small companies, people pitching him stories. So how do you rise above that noise?